1944. A convoy entered Ofot Fjord, and the sky erased the sea. In January 1944, Narvik's nights were longer than memory. The oar pier creaked like a metronome, and the fjord wore its blackout like a hood. At 1810, a convoy of 4, coasters Vidda and Stalin, tanker Bjorli, and the escorting minesweeper M132 eased off the mole with lamps hooded and sirens silent. Orders were stitched to silence. Run inside Ofot Fjord until Tranøy, then out to sea under the lee of snow. The harbor signalman wrote 3 lines in his book: barometer falling, wind veering east, convoy cavern to depart, then underlined them as if that could hold weather to the page. The resistance watched from aloft where cod hung like punctuation. A boy counted wakes by moonshiver and lost one as if a keel had learned to walk on air. On Djupvik Heights, a Würzburg dish revolved. Vogsfjelle carried a Freya set that dreamed of angels on its screen. Wireless kept quiet until a single call cracked it. M132 to convoy, alter 2-point starboard. Followed by a scrape like sheet ice dragged over wire. The voice did not resume. Snow came without ceremony. A wall shouldered down the fjord, erasing cliffs into possibilities. Sound shrank, then traveled too far. The pilot on Stolen throttled back because the echo off the rock said faster would be foolish. Ahead, the minesweeper's stern light appeared and disappeared like a rumor testing its courage. Then, for 30 seconds, the night rehearsed a daylight. A green ribbon low to the water, aurora fallen to its wages, showing a corridor straight as command. All 4 vessels aligned inside it as tidily as a line of type. And then the ribbon went out. The signalman at Narvik, pencil mid-air, missed his period. The loft boy whispered a number that did not match the tally and kept it to himself. At 1902, the harbor phone rang. A voice from Hergod asked why a convoy had passed twice without passing once. At 1911, a trawler off Ramnes said the sea was crowded with wakes and none had owners. The pencil found the period and pressed through the paper. Fjord declined to comment. Fjords make corridors when weather consents. That night, the air layered itself like panes, mild over cold, salt over fresh, sound traveling sideways inside the seam. Thermal inversion turned cliffs into mirrors. Radar on the heights painted doubles and then erased them. At Straumsnes, the German hydrophone hut logged screws climbing in pitch as if the convoy were ascending a staircase. Twice the sound faded to nothing and returned already ahead. The petty officer wrote propellers skipping steps, then crossed it out because notes should not speculate. Net gates clanked as they opened. Buoy lanterns were blacked, bells muffled with rags. The minesweeper led where charts remembered old mine rows, paravanes out, wires humming against water as if testing a violin. On the coasters, the helmsmen steered by mountain shapes they could not see but knew by inheritance. Against the snow, the wake showed as a faint bruising of dark. At 1923, the Freya set on Vogsfjelle reported 4 echoes on a tight line, then 3, then, briefly, 5. The operator tapped the glass and saw his own finger duplicated. He logged Angel Return. In the hut below, the hydrophones agreed and did not. 4, 3, many, none. Somewhere near Ramnes, a watcher with field glasses heard engines at a bearing where his lenses held only night. He marked an X on a chart with a pencil that had frozen shorter than its ferrule. Just after the turn at Tranoi, a blue flicker walked the rigging of Bioli and stepped off into the water, St. Elmo. Sailors crossed themselves because physics comes late to cold fingers. The escort called once more, a clipped "mind the" that became a hiss. The fjord breathed. Then nothing in particular happened. No blast, no column of water. The feeling that the corridor had closed one door and opened another, not on any pilotage. The Freya watched the line of echoes tilt into the cliff as if guided there. In the recorder's pencil groove, the trace trembled and straightened as though ashamed. On Straumsnes, the petty officer inked a single word in the margin. Vanished. Morning found a ship that kept its name and lost its people. Near Tisfjord, a fishing cutter came alongside a small coaster drifting across the faint swell as if late to its own mooring. She was Vida. Her screw ticked at slow ahead. The wheel was neatly lashed and no hand to unlash it. Lifeboats were aboard, gripes fast. Coffee steamed on the stove and tasted of iron. 2 men boarded. They called and did not expect an answer. Rhyme traced where breath had lived. Bootprints walked to the starboard rail and changed their minds. In the mess, a spoon tapped as the ship rolled. The log lay open on the chart table, edges damp as though read by fog. The entry stopped after core --. Beneath, lightly in another hand, hold. In the hold, sacks of ore had fallen sideways, leaving a passage the width of a man. On the bulkhead, 3 short chalk marks and 1 long, the sort a signalman uses when the key fails him. Below, fingerprints in dust like small constellations. Bilges were dry, gauges steady. A rag hung on a nail and reconsidered falling. Forward, a mooring line paid out into nothing and came back with weed from a depth beyond any bollard. Its end carried a knot they did not know. A loop locked with a tuck that resembled a bowline taught the wrong alphabet. Touching it made filling prickle. The skipper spoke of tow. The cutter's radio coughed a phrase it had not dialed. Convoy inbound, convoy inbound. In a voice that belonged to M132's petty officer and had no business being alive. They towed anyway. Vida followed with the shy obedience of an animal that had seen too much. At Narvik, the harbor men boarded in silence, counted cups, and failed to find the count of souls. The signalman drew a box around the word hold and shut the book as if it might spread. Signals can be shy even when recorded. That week, the Luftwaffe plot at Bardufoss wrote, then scratched out, a thin track crossing Ofot Fjord and ending where cliffs prefer avalanches. A Kriegsmarine decrypt from Tromsø, later found in a folder that smelled of damp felt, noted, Konvoi Kvern verspätet oder aufgegeben, delayed or abandoned. The same day, a British Y station in Shetland logged a burst from occupied Norway in a hand they knew as a Norwegian cleaner in a Wehrmacht office. Narvik convoy lost in fog that is not fog. The operator circled north. Weather kept its own ledger. The Met Office called it a polar low, a coil spun over comparative warmth, tight isobars wound like wire round a finger. Barometers sulked. Gusts arrived from everywhere at once and sat down abruptly like tired men. Banff Strike Wing flew under a ceiling that scolded them and returned with film of wakes without ships. One mosquito frame, later misfiled under forestry, showed twin-feathered lines running straight for half a mile and dying into a cliff with no hull between. A U-boat KTB claimed sighting of Nordlichterscheinung am Wasser, northern light at the water, near Tranøy on the night of the loss, with mehrere Schraubengeräusche unter mir, several screw noises beneath me, though the boat ran on the surface and the sea rarely permits such geometry. The entry was underlined twice and followed by a request to check hydrophones for faults. In Narvik, the harbour master wrote a letter he did not send to a colleague in Bergen who would have laughed until he read it. Dear Jens, tonight the fjord was full of consequences without causes. He put the paper in a drawer and later burned it with old signal pads. The smoke smelled like rope. In the signal book, the pencil wore to a knob. The line that mattered, "Convoy vanished between Tranøy and Ramnes," was written, erased, written again, as if the script were trying to find a tone that could be passed off as weather. None of it returned the ships. The Aurora took its pay in green and left. Search began with mathematics and ended with listening. Minesweepers swept what mines would have been if anyone had laid them there. Paravanes throbbed, sweeps hissed, and the reels sang a note that made teeth remember childhood. Tugs dragged grapnels along contours known by fishermen and by nothing written. Divers went over in canvas and brass, where fjord walls fell away like the idea of depth made stone. They found a rent in the anti-subnet, where no ship could have struck without telling the wire. The torn edge was fused like candle wax and slicked to the glove, as though heat had remembered to be tidy. On a shelf at 20 meters lay a tangle of kelp, held down by a coil of hawser that had learned a new knot. The diver's slate shows a drawing that is not in any seamanship book. A loop locked by a turn inside itself, a character more than a splice. Sound carried parish news. Hydrophones laid out at Straumsnes heard screws pass north to south hours after the last echo had been written off. Then the same screws returned south to north, wearing unfamiliar intervals, as if the engines had picked up someone else's song. Once men heard a bell underwater that did not belong to a buoy. Its note walked along the cable and sat down in the hut. At dusk, a flare hung and died, as if embarrassed by the snow. The minesweeper called a bearing. The echo answered from rock. In the sounder trace, a cliff became a soft pencil, then argued itself back to stone. A trawl brought up ore lumps whose edges rang when knocked together. The harbor master pocketed one and later returned it to the water because it felt like stealing from a story. They raised nothing with a name. Charts sprouted crosses and apologies. The Admiralty telegram used words that do not bruise, presumed lost. The Resistance memo used one that does, taken. In the Narvik book, the line lengthened by a date and a last small addition in the margin. Wake seen without hull, 2214. Photographs kept the convoy more faithfully than paper. In April, a Luftwaffe reconnaissance roll, boxed and mislabeled Forst Nadelwaldflächen, surfaced in a Bergen auction decades later. Frame 18 showed Ofotfjord under low cloud. Across it ran 3 pale wakes like stitches. There were no hulls, no shadows, only the geometry water draws when persuaded by weight. A thumbprint smudged the margin. Under it, in faint pencil, A duty officer's note. Durchzug 19:10 bestätigt. Passage at 1910 confirmed. A Norwegian fisherman took a picture the same night with a box camera that made everything simple. He was aiming at Aurora for his daughter. The print shows green fire draped like laundry, and lower, 4 soft ovals the size of midges on the emulsion. Flares, perhaps. Except no unit claimed them, and their reflections on the water run ahead, not behind. He showed the print to no one until after the war because the camera was not licensed. After 1945, archives learned new names for old folders. A British can labeled Coastal Strike. Banff Wing held a fragment of gun camera footage from the week. Ragged coastline, a splash from some earlier argument. Then the lens finds a wake that ends at rock and begins nowhere, as if a ship had agreed to be wake only. The pilot's voice is absent. The film was silent stock and remained so. Family albums added gentler evidence. A boy posed on the pier in 1953. Cap crooked, war a rumor now. Behind him, the water shows a smudge against the glare that does not match any tide, set at a human angle as if a vessel were on a heading still refusing to be told otherwise. His grandmother circled it in blue ink and wrote only Den Gangen that time. Experts wrote careful papers about inversions and surface duct propagation, about radar angels and auroral electrojets making compasses thoughtful, about katabatic gusts carving wakes where none belong. All true, maybe. The photographs kept their soft ovals and their wakes without ships and asked to be filed under weather so they could sleep. They have not. After the war, the fjord kept its ledger with fewer witnesses. Ore ships returned, Hurtigruten resumed its patience. On a granite slab near Narvik, the names were lettered without drama. Vidda, Stolen, Bjorli, and 132, with the words presumed with honor. A bell from another wreck tolled like a memory doing its best. Old men offered maps. One tapped the turn off Tranøy, 3 short, 1 long, as if answering a signal nobody had finished. Another recalled a winter when wakes ran upriver and then reconsidered. In the hydrophone hut at Straumsnes, the new set, all dials and good manners, still heard screws pass on nights when the schedule printed none. The petty officer's successor wrote them, erased them, wrote them again smaller. Tourists learn how iron leaves the mountain and returns as steel. Guides point to the heights where Freya and Würzburg once listened and say, "Radar Angel." Down at the water, the ferry cuts its furrow. Some evenings, another furrow crosses it at a human angle and continues for a minute. Phones come out. The picture shows nothing definite and everything true. A salvage in the 1960s lifted a section of net with its tear fused like wax and a length of mooring line knotted in a loop that taught no one anything. The museum keeps them under glass beside a chalkboard where visitors try to draw the knot and invent new failures. In a drawer, a curator keeps an ore lump that rings when tapped and puts it back, because stories are heaviest when carried home. Stand at Ramnes at Blue Hour, and the cliffs decide themselves. If the wind is northerly, you may hear a bell travel the cable. Out on the black water, a small procession moves without lights, wakes crossing like handwriting taught by cold. No voices, only the fjord thinking, and the patient scrape of a pencil under words already written. Convoy. Present.